water is surface water and groundwater. We hardly have surface water in the Gulf. The groundwater is one of the main countries' water resources supply, and the level of the groundwater is dropping by around 60 meters on average in the Gulf region. So the supply could run out in the next few years. Therefore, we need to look at unconventional ways of producing water to the growing population in the Gulf region. And this unconventional water would be the desalinated water and would be the treated water or wastewater. We are throwing it back to the sea down the drainage. In the UAE alone, the population has been growing. Currently, we are around 9.8 million. And the average water consumption is one of the highest in the world. The average in the world between 170 to 300 liters per day. In the UAE and the Gulf region in general, it's around 550 liters per day, the consumption of water. The agriculture takes most of the water. Actually, agriculture accounts to around 0.7% of the GDP and consumes more than 60% of the total water use. Luckily, in the UAE, we have, or the UAE government introduced efficient irrigation techniques, such as drip irrigations, and that is well known to reduce around 35% of water consumption compared to traditional systems. We can learn from the world. There are many examples around the globe. I just put 2 countries here are leading in water in general. In Singapore, where they have every drop counts, they have new water as well as desalinated water. We all know the history of Singapore and the water shortages. When they separated from Malaysia, they didn't have any water. Now, one of the leading water technology hubs around the globe. They have new water to supply currently around 30% of Singapore's total water demand. And the plan is to have around 55% by 2060. That came from combination of government support, long-term planning, and community outreach aimed at collecting, treating, reusing, and producing the necessary water resources for the country. Again, another example is Israel, where they rely a lot on renewables. Israel introduced public information campaign on conservation and consumption of water, and they rely on desalination plants, and renewables account for around roughly 4% of the energy produced in the country. And now they have mandatory solar water heating regulations in place to increase shares of renewables, therefore reduce the cost of water and reduce the amount of water people are using from conservation. If we move forward, there are many solutions. Those solutions lie in a collective effort. I would say, as a scientist myself, increasing and investing in research and technology in the fields of water, food, and energy. Research in achieving the security for water, energy, and food simultaneously. And this should be carried out to guide policymakers to make informed decisions for the country. Again, many innovations are in research centers and universities around the region and around the globe. So technology transfer of solutions from academia to industry is extremely important, as well as tapping into unconventional water resources, such as desalinated water and wastewater plants. And then increase the share of renewable energy in the mix or the total mix of energy in the country. Thank you very much. Now we can have questions around this topic. I wanted to make it this overview very short and very general so we can have discussions. Thank you. Sanjiv.
Thank you, Professor Nidal. Obviously, this is a very large topic to cover in 10 minutes. but you did an excellent job to get us a good overview of the challenges. Talking about challenges, while most people in the world today may say our challenge is COVID-19, and they would be right. But with the vaccines that are now being rolled out in the UAE, in the United States, and across the world, this may be an issue that we may be looking in the rear view mirror in maybe 6 months, possibly 12 months. But even before COVID-19, there was a larger challenge, and that was with global warming and climate change and greenhouse gases. New York University in 2010 took that challenge upon themselves, and they decided that they are going to reduce their greenhouse gases by 30% in 10 years. Well, they actually achieved the goal in 2017, so 3 years before the target. And they have now set new goals. By 2025, they expect to reduce the greenhouse gases by 50%. And by 2050, their goal is to be carbon neutral. So I think where there is a will, there is a way. And, even speaking about UAE, UAE was the first country in the GCC that ratified the Paris Agreement, and they did so in 2016. And UAE Vision 2021 talks about finding solutions to sustainable development by year 2030. So what is your opinion? Again, I come back to the question where there is a will, there's a way. So can we accomplish this? Can we actually meet these goals?
In my opinion, the UAE is leading in the region, leading in the world for CO2 reductions. If I talk just about water alone, there are ways of reducing the CO2 emissions and reducing the energy demand for the water. Most of the region now relies on thermal desalination. Thermal desalination is energy intensive technique. Now, there are other technologies such as RO desalination using membrane technology, which takes much less energy. The UAE is leading in this. It's building now Tawila plant, which is one of the largest in the world for relying on membrane technology and therefore reducing the energy demand for desalination. Of course, thermal technology, you burn oil to produce heat, and that heat evaporates the water, and therefore you are throwing CO2 to the environment. With membrane technology, that's much less because you rely on electrical energy for this. Again, water reuse, water consumptions. In general, if we reduce these things, we reduce the amount of water we produce, we reduce the amount of CO2 and the amount of energy we are spending on water. Again, for environmental issues, we reduce the amount of brines we are throwing back to the environment. So I believe UAE is leading in this and on the way compared to other countries in the region and globally.
Very good. So we have spent quite a bit of time discussing the challenges of energy generation as well as water. But the third leg of this stool, so to speak, is food and food security. As we all know, UAE and other countries like UAE in the region are very reliant on food imports. By various counts, depending on which references you look at, 85 to 90% of all the food that's consumed in the UAE is imported. And that, of course, is a challenge. UAE has embarked on different innovative technologies. These are technologies that have been proven in other countries, in other societies, and they have adapted and adopted them. For instance, vertical farms. There are now a number of vertical farms in Dubai. They have also done a lot of investments in greenhouse for growing of leafy vegetables and tomatoes, which form one of the primary foods in this region. Apart from that, aquaponics and research in rice. Rice, of course, if you know the population of UAE, rice is one of the main staples. All different cultures that are part of UAE, the rice is their principal diet. So semi rice, which is they've tried to grow that in Sharjah. All of these things that they're trying use less water. And in some cases, for example, for the greenhouses, they use photovoltaic to generate the energy that the greenhouses need. But the efforts are only in the infancy, and they are quite widespread, but they need to be ramped up to make it economically viable. Do you foresee in the next 10 years that happening in this region? Just your opinion, maybe.
Yes, I do foresee this happening in the region. I believe the region is outlooking into a lot of new technologies to be able to provide food for the population. And a lot of things around innovative techniques are being investigated and used, some of them in the region, in many of the farms and in many of the Emirates. The government of the UAE is looking forward all the time into innovative techniques, and they take on board a lot of these techniques. If you look at the vision for the next 50 years of the UAE, it is part of the vision to provide for the population and to be self-sufficient in many of these things. And to some extent, the food is one of those.
Very good. There is a saying in the United States, those who have more, consume more. So really the key is the 3 big R's of sustainability, that is reduce, recycle, reuse. And even in that area, UAE is making very concentrated efforts to reduce the food waste and recycle and so forth. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. And Professor Hilal, I would like to thank you for a very insightful presentation. And for all the attendees who are joining us from across the globe, we look forward to seeing you shortly in the plenary session of this forum. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Nidal?
I think we're done, are we?
Yep, we're done. So thank you. And
thank you have a nice day.
You too, you too. And
Bye-bye.
I look forward to seeing you this summer.
I see you in May, I hope. Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Take care.